They call it an empty nest. For years, I thought that meant peace. Waking up to the morning mist rolling off the Topa Topa Mountains, sipping coffee on my porch in Ojai, California, surrounded by the cedar scent of my craftsman home. This house has stood for nearly a century. Its hardwood floors have creaked beneath generations of laughter, and its walls hold the oil paintings my late husband and I collected during our decades practicing estate law together. I spent 40 years of my life inside courtrooms, drafting ironclad trusts and ensuring people's final wishes were protected by law. I knew how easily human relationships could fracture over property. Yet, looking back, I never truly believed I would have to draft a legal contract to protect my own home from my only son. It started with a suitcase in the hallway and a rehearsed look of financial exhaustion on my son Arthur. Arthur is 35 now, drifting from one stalled business venture to another. Standing beside him was his wife, Brittany, 33, whose expensive tastes always outpaced their income. They had arrived unannounced on a Tuesday afternoon, their luxury sedan packed with boxes, claiming their rental lease had fallen through due to sudden market shifts. "Mom, it's just a temporary landing pad," Arthur said, flashing his boyish, disarming smile. "Just until we get our footing, save up for a down payment, and find a place of our own. 6 months, max. We wouldn't ask if we had any other choice." 6 months. That was the magic number they threw around with casual lightness. They stood in my entryway, looking around my sunlit living room with eyes that didn't see a mother's sanctuary, but a free hotel and an escape hatch. Brittany didn't even bother pretending she was grateful. Her eyes scanned the original artwork and polished furniture with a calculating appraisal, already measuring how the space would look once my belongings were cleared out to make room for theirs. Had I been built purely on sentimental weakness, I might have thrown open my arms and told them they could stay as long as they pleased. But I was Eleanor Vance, a retired estate lawyer who had spent 40 decades watching families tear themselves apart because they assumed family ties superseded basic legal accountability. I knew that when you invite someone into your house without clear boundaries, you aren't offering shelter, you are handing them the keys to your sovereignty. I didn't yell. I walked over to my antique oak roll-top desk, pulled out a crisp legal document, and slid it across the polished wood toward them. "If you are staying under my roof, we do things by the book," I said, my voice entirely devoid of maternal warmth. "This is a residential lease agreement, tailored specifically for family occupancy. It grants you temporary residency for exactly 180 days, 6 months to the date. It outlines your mandatory contribution to utilities, strict maintenance protocols, and a non-negotiable move-out date of May 1st. Read every clause carefully before you sign your names." The silence grew heavy in the room. Arthur's easy smile vanished instantly into stunned disbelief. But it was Brittany who reacted with true venom. Her nostrils flared into a bitter, incredulous line as she looked from the paper up to my face, unable to mask her sudden rage. "A lease? Are you seriously treating your own son and daughter-in-law like transient tenants?" Brittany scoffed, her voice dripping with defensive outrage. "We're family, Eleanor. What kind of mother pulls out legal paperwork when her children are down on their luck and asking for help?" She crossed her arms tightly over her chest, waiting for me to fold under her heavy guilt trip. But I had spent a lifetime learning that emotion is often just a smokescreen used to justify exploitation. I didn't blink. I slid a Mont Blanc pen across the desk, right beside Arthur's trembling hand.
If you are the responsible adults you claim to be, a contract should give you comfort, not cause you panic, I replied calmly. Love is built on emotional trust, but cohabitation is built on clear boundaries. If you intend to honor your promise of staying only 6 months, signing this document should be the easiest thing you do today. If you have a problem with accountability, the front door is right behind you. Arthur swallowed hard, glancing sideways at his wife. Brittany shot him a furious, desperate look, urging him to rebel, but they had nowhere else to go. With a tight, humiliated jaw, Arthur reached out, picked up the pen, and scratched his signature onto the bottom line, followed bitterly by Brittany's angry handwriting. As I watched the ink dry on the page, a quiet smile touched my lips. They thought they had outsmarted the system. They had no idea they had just signed their own undoing.
That signed lease paper sat locked in my desk drawer, but as the weeks ticked by, it quickly became clear that ink on paper meant nothing to people who viewed rules as mere suggestions. The first 6 months vanished in a blur of empty promises. May 1st arrived, the exact deadline set for them to pack their boxes and move out. Instead of packing boxes, Arthur walked into my kitchen on a rainy Tuesday morning holding a cup of coffee, wearing that familiar expression of rehearsed helplessness. "Mom, we need to talk," Arthur began, leaning against the counter. "The housing market is completely insane right now. Interest rates are through the roof, and Brittany's startup needs a bit more runway. We need an extension, another 18 months, and we promise we'll be completely on our feet." 18 months. Not a few weeks, but a year and a half. They weren't planning on leaving. They were planning on settling in permanently. I didn't raise my voice, nor did I reach for the lease document just yet. I simply looked at him, letting the silence stretch until he shifted uncomfortably. But I didn't need to argue because their actions were already speaking volumes, writing a loud, unmistakable story of exploitation right in front of me. Within days of that conversation, the subtle boundary crossing escalated into full-scale invasion. Arthur pulled into my driveway one afternoon behind the wheel of a brand new top-of-the-line luxury SUV, shining, metallic, and sporting temporary dealer tags. When I checked with a neighbor who happened to overhear their boasts, I learned the vehicle cost $85,000. An $85,000 luxury vehicle sitting in my driveway, while just 2 nights prior, Arthur had cornered me in the hallway to complain about how tight money was, asking if I could cover the utility bill for that month because their cash flow was squeezed. They weren't struggling. They were simply outsourcing their living expenses to a retired woman so they could fund a lifestyle they had no business maintaining. Inside the house, Brittany's behavior grew even more brazen. She treated my craftsman home not as a borrowed space, but as an estate she had already inherited. One afternoon, I walked into the living room to find her taking down a framed oil painting that my late husband and I had purchased during our anniversary trip to Carmel, stacking it against the wall next to a box of donation items. "Oh, Eleanor, I'm glad you're here," Brittany said smoothly, without a shred of embarrassment. "This dark, old-fashioned art makes the room feel so heavy. We're modernizing the aesthetic. Minimalist chic is in, and this old frame just doesn't fit the vibe we want when clients come over." She didn't ask. She didn't consult me. She was redecorating my home as if I were already a ghost haunting the corridors. The crowning insult came a week later during a family dinner. Brittany set down her fork, looked around the dining room with a critical sigh, and dropped a suggestion so audacious it made my blood run cold. "You know, Arthur and I were talking," Brittany announced, her voice dripping with casual entitlement. "Once we have kids, we're going to need a lot more room. This master bedroom you have on the main floor is wasted on a single person. It has direct access to the back patio. It would make an incredible nursery and master suite for us. You barely use the basement level anyway. It's dry, and it would be so cozy and quiet for you down there." There it was.
out in the open. The daughter-in-law I had sheltered was politely suggesting that I, the owner of the house, banish myself to a damp subterranean basement so they could take over my master bedroom. Had I been a different person, I might have thrown plates or screamed at the top of my lungs, but decades of navigating bitter civil litigation taught me one absolute truth: never interrupt an opponent when they are busy making fatal mistakes. Anger is loud, but documentation is lethal. I didn't yell. I didn't argue or negotiate. I simply set my napkin down on the table, looked straight into Brittany's eyes, and delivered a single, chilling sentence. This house has a foundation, Brittany, and it was built with my sweat, not your imagination. From that moment on, I stopped reacting emotionally and started working like a lawyer building an airtight case. Every single day, I gathered evidence. I took clear photographs of the $85,000 SUV parked in my driveway, matching the date with their verbal claims of poverty. I saved every utility bill they forced on me while they squandered cash on luxury items. I made meticulous digital backups of the expired 6-month lease agreement, logging every single breach of contract, every unauthorized structural alteration, and every documented instance of bad faith. They thought my silence meant submission. They believed my calm demeanor was a sign of weakness, proof that they had finally broken me down. But they had no idea that behind my quiet smile, the trap was already set, and the countdown to their reckoning had officially begun.
The strategy they chose next was far more dangerous than redecorating my living room or parking an overpriced vehicle in my driveway. They decided to target my independence at its root, my financial autonomy. It began on a Tuesday evening with a performance of calculated filial concern. Arthur sat at the kitchen island, nursing a cup of chamomile tea, wearing an expression of deep, manufactured anxiety. He brought up my age, my upcoming 70th birthday, and the alleged complexities of managing household expenses alone. He spoke of efficiency, of streamlining bills, and how difficult it was for me to handle banking chores as the years piled on. Mom, you shouldn't have to stress yourself over monthly statements, property taxes, or grocery runs, Arthur said, his tone dripping with a smooth, practiced affection that masked his true intentions. Why don't we consolidate things? If you just open a secondary line of credit linked to your primary accounts and give me joint oversight or partial power of attorney over everyday expenditures, Brittany and I can handle all the household payments. It will take a massive weight off your shoulders, and you won't have to worry about a single bill ever again. Joint oversight, partial power of attorney. In plain English, they wanted keys to the vault. They wanted legal authorization to dip into a lifetime of savings under the benevolent guise of helping an aging parent. Had I been reacting out of emotion, I might have slammed my fist on the table and driven them out of the house. But decades spent in civil wrong rooms taught me that when a predator reveals their strategy, you do not block them. You give them enough rope to secure their own bind. I wanted them to feel secure in their delusion of control. I wanted them to believe they had successfully breached my final line of defense. So I played my part. I looked across the counter, let a soft, hesitant sigh escape my lips, and pretended to weigh their proposal with the fragile vulnerability of an aging woman who was tired of fighting. I suppose it has been a bit overwhelming lately, I murmured softly, letting my shoulders drop just enough to sell the performance. If you truly want to help manage the household expenses so I don't have to carry the burden alone, I can set up a controlled secondary account for you. The subtle gleam of triumph that flashed across Arthur and Brittany's faces was unmistakable. They thought they had crossed the finish line. They believed the fortress had finally opened its gates from the inside. The very next day, I visited my local bank branch. I did not grant them access to my retirement funds, nor did I sign any power of attorney documents.
Instead, I established a strict secondary line of credit specifically isolated for household necessities, backed by a hard credit limit of exactly $2,500, just enough for monthly groceries and basic emergency provisions. To Arthur and Brittany, I handed over a card with a sleek black finish, telling them it was tied to my general accounts and could be used for household needs. They didn't check the fine print, and they didn't ask for bank statements, blinded entirely by their own arrogance and the intoxicating anticipation of unlimited funds. What followed next was a masterclass in self-destruction. Within 48 hours of receiving that card, the illusion of their financial struggle vanished completely. The text alerts from my bank began pinging my phone with relentless frequency. $2,500 is a modest sum, but they treated it like an infinite waterfall. First came a heavy charge from a high-end boutique hotel down in Santa Barbara for a weekend romantic getaway. Then came charges from luxury dining establishments, boutique clothing stores, and online retailers specializing in high-end electronics. They weren't buying groceries, they were funding a lifestyle of leisure on my dime, operating under the absolute delusion that my bank account was a bottomless well that would never run dry. Most people in my position would have panicked, grabbed the phone, and screamed at their children for stealing. Most parents would have immediately canceled the card in a fit of righteous fury. But I did none of that. I sat quietly at my antique desk every morning, sipping my coffee, watching the digital transaction alerts stream in one by one. I didn't block a single purchase. I didn't send a single warning text. Instead, I exported every digital statement, logged every time-stamped transaction, saved every digital receipt, and archived the exact geolocation data of their luxury weekend getaways. Every unauthorized charge, every lavish dinner, and every luxury purchase was meticulously recorded, cross-referenced, and filed away into an encrypted digital folder. They believed they were robbing me blind behind my back. In reality, they were painstakingly manufacturing the ultimate, unarguable paper trail of bad faith, financial fraud, and systematic exploitation. They were digging their own legal graves with every swipe of that card, and I was holding the shovel steady for them, waiting for the precise moment the earth beneath their feet would give way.
The final threshold of human audacity was crossed in the first week of November, right as autumn winds began stripping the stubborn leaves from the oak trees. Up to that point, I had watched them siphon my electricity, redecorate my living room, and covertly fund luxury getaways using the secondary credit line. But I assumed there was still a baseline boundary they wouldn't dare violate: the sanctity of my home during the holidays. I was profoundly mistaken. It happened on a rainy Wednesday evening when I was reviewing old legal files. Brittany waltzed into my study without knocking, holding a stack of glossy cardstock envelopes that smelled strongly of expensive printer ink. She didn't look like a guest or a tenant. She wore the triumphant expression of a general surveying newly conquered territory. Without asking, she dropped one of the envelopes right on top of my paperwork. I picked it up and opened it. Emblazoned across the front in elegant gold calligraphy was an invitation to a massive Thanksgiving gathering, hosted not at a rented venue, but right here, at my Craftsman home in Ojai. The invite listed 40 guests, not a close family dinner, but a full-scale corporate-sized banquet involving her entire extended family, complete with catering notes and arrival schedules spanning a 4-day holiday weekend. Before I could even voice my shock, Brittany laid out the operational plan as if she were reading me a room service itinerary. She informed me that they had already finalized the guest list weeks ago, printed the invitations, and sent them out without ever whispering a single word to me. They hadn't asked for permission, they hadn't checked my availability, and they certainly didn't care that this was my private home.
In their minds, my house was simply an asset they had already absorbed into their own portfolio. And then came the instructions for my role in the grand event. With casual arrogance, Brittany informed me that since I enjoyed cooking traditional dishes, I would be personally responsible for sourcing, prepping, and roasting the main holiday turkeys and side dishes for all 40 attendees. They would handle greeting the guests, of course, acting graciously as hosts, while I stayed quietly in the kitchen, managing the heavy labor, keeping out of sight so as not to crowd the formal spaces. The audacity didn't stop at the kitchen door. The demands extended straight into my private sanctuary upstairs. With a dismissive flick of her wrist, Brittany leaned against my bookshelf and casually delivered the most humiliating demand yet. She stated that since her parents and elder relatives were traveling out of state, they deserved the best accommodations. She instructed me to clear out my personal wardrobe and completely vacate my master bedroom on the main floor. The master suite, the room my late husband and I had shared for decades, was to be handed over to her parents and uncle for the duration of the holiday. And where was I supposed to sleep while 40 strangers occupied my bed? Brittany waved her hand vaguely toward the rear of the house, suggesting I move my mattress down into the dark, unfinished utility corner of the basement, claiming it would be cozy and out from under everyone's feet. She stood there smiling, genuinely expecting me to nod in agreement, fold my hands submissively, and accept my demotion from homeowner to household servant in the very place I had built with my own hands. For a fraction of a second, the sheer weight of their entitlement hung in the air. Most people listening to this would expect me to erupt, to throw those glossy invitations back in her face, or to scream at the top of my lungs until the walls shook. But screaming gives your adversary power. Anger alerts the enemy that they have hit a nerve. I looked up from the invitation, my face entirely devoid of panic, anger, or protest. I didn't raise my voice, nor did I argue a single point. Instead, a strange, quiet calm washed over me, the cold, calculating composure of a seasoned litigator who has just watched the opposing counsel hand over the winning document on a silver platter. I looked straight into Brittany's expectant eyes, let a thin smile touch my lips, and delivered a single, chilling sentence that sealed their fate. Granted, let everything unfold precisely as planned. My voice was so soft, so completely devoid of resistance, that Brittany blinked in momentary surprise, clearly expecting a fight she didn't get. Satisfied that her dominance was absolute, she turned on her heel and walked out of the study, calling out to Arthur that her mother had agreed to everything. Downstairs, I could hear Arthur and Brittany laughing, popping open a bottle of wine to celebrate how easily they had broken me down. They spent the next 2 weeks reveling in your victory, bragging to friends over the phone about the grand Thanksgiving estate party they were throwing at their home, completely oblivious to the ticking clock above their heads. They believed my unnatural calm was the submission of a defeated old woman. They had no idea that my silence wasn't surrender. It was the quiet, terrifying stillness right before the storm breaks.
The radio frequency holds its breath, and in that vacuum, my silence became louder than any argument they could have thrown at me. For 2 solid weeks leading up to Thanksgiving, the kitchen, once the pulsing, aromatic heart of this house, remained hauntingly cold. I didn't bake, I didn't scrub the floorboards clean despite the mounting pile of subtle, passive-aggressive sticky notes Clara left on the counter reminding me of my domestic duties. Let her sticky notes pile up, let the dust settle on the hardwood. I had far more critical matters to attend to than seasoning a turkey for people who viewed me as nothing more than a live-in housekeeper with a pension. Behind closed doors in my study, The real work was unfolding. While Marcus and Clara were busy drafting guest lists, arguing over wine selections, and curating an aesthetic Instagram menu to impress their circle of shallow friends, my room operated like a war room. I held back-to-back confidential meetings with a boutique firm of former colleagues, sharks in tailored suits who remembered my name from my days inside the courtroom, and senior representatives from a local nonprofit real estate trust. We didn't raise our voices. We didn't need to. Law, when executed with absolute precision, doesn't scream. It simply locks the door and throws away the key. Every deed, every trust document, every financial transfer tied to the secondary accounts I had funded out of misguided maternal affection was meticulously audited, tracked, and frozen at the root. By the 14th day, the trap was fully set. The legal web was spun so tightly that not even a microscopic loophole remained for them to slip through. On the morning of the 14th day, the final legal weapon was officially loaded and primed. I signed the formal injunctions that triggered an immediate, comprehensive freeze on all supplementary accounts tied to my primary estate. Every shared credit card, every emergency buffer fund, every digital wallet they had treated like an endless ATM. At the exact same moment, formal legal notices were dispatched via certified courier and hand-delivered by an officer of the court. The document was unambiguous, an immediate termination of their residential occupancy agreement, cutting short their 18-month lease due to severe violations of asset misuse, bad faith property exploitation, and fraudulent credit manipulation. The demand was stark, absolute, and non-negotiable. Surrender full possession of the premises back to the legal owner no later than 12 o'clock sharp on Thanksgiving Day. I stood by the window of my study, watching the autumn wind strip the last stubborn leaves from the oak tree in the front yard. My hands were steady as I slid the thick stack of court-stamped documents, compliance affidavits, and financial audit trails into a heavy, classic leather briefcase, snapping the brass combination lock securely into place. It clicked with a clean, heavy sound, the sound of finality. Down the hall, I could hear Clara humming a cheerful tune, debating over whether they should order imported artisan cheese or settle for local brie for their grand holiday gathering. They were planning a feast to celebrate a victory they thought they had already won, completely oblivious to the fact that the floor beneath their feet had already turned to glass. I didn't leak a single whisper of suspicion, no warning glance, no slip of the tongue, no emotional outburst. I let them sink deeper into their illusion of absolute control, saving every ounce of my energy for the historical table flip that was waiting for them just around the corner. When Clara walked past my door later that afternoon, balancing a stack of glossy party invitations, she paused for a fraction of a second, tossing a casual, condescending remark into the room. "Make sure you stay out of our way in the kitchen tomorrow. We're hosting important people, and we don't need any of your old-fashioned gloom ruining the aesthetic." I didn't look up from my desk. I just offered a slow, chillingly calm smile that made her visibly blink in momentary confusion before she turned away. "Don't worry, Clara," my voice cutting through the quiet air with the cold, sharp precision of a scalpel. "You'll have all the space you deserve. Just make sure you pack your bags before noon. You're going to need every second you've got." She laughed it off, assuming it was just another bitter old woman remark, entirely unaware that the clock was already ticking down to 0, and the executioner's axe was poised to fall.
The morning of Thanksgiving arrived wrapped in a crisp, brilliant autumn sun that cast long golden shadows across the Ojai Valley. But inside my house, the atmospheric pressure felt heavier than a gathering storm. Exactly at 11:30 in the morning, the peaceful silence of the driveway was shattered by the distinct crunch of gravel tires.
A long, chaotic convoy of vehicles, sedans, minivans, and overflowing SUVs pulled up one after another, parking haphazardly across my lawn, blocking the walkways and spilling out onto the cul-de-sac. 40 relatives. Brittany's entire extended family had arrived for the grand holiday banquet. Car doors slammed shut in rapid succession. Laughter, booming voices, and children shouting echoed across the property as people spilled out onto the front porch, carrying heavy suitcases, garment bags, and wrapped holiday gifts. They didn't look like hesitant guests arriving at a private residence. They marched through the front gates with the casual, entitled familiarity of vacationers checking into a five-star resort where everything had already been paid for. They stepped over my flower beds, dragged their heavy luggage across the hardwood porch, and flooded into the foyer without a second thought, bringing the chaotic noise of a crowded hotel lobby directly into my home. Brittany materialized from the kitchen hallway, her face flushed with excitement and triumphant pride. She threw her arms open wide, playing the gracious hostess of an estate she didn't own, basking in the adoration of her visiting parents and aunts and uncles. "Welcome, everyone! Make yourselves completely at home. Find a room, settle in," Brittany announced loudly, her voice trilling with artificial sweetness. She turned sharply towards the kitchen, where Arthur was standing awkwardly near the counter, snapping her fingers at him with effortless condescension. "Arthur, stop standing there looking lost. Run out to the driveway and help Uncle Bob with his golf bags and luggage. And someone check on the kitchen. We need appetizers out immediately." Having issued her commands to her husband, Brittany turned her attention toward the grand staircase leading to the upper level. Assuming I was hidden away in the kitchen scrubbing pans or upstairs in her little corner as she had ordered, she raised her voice, pitching it high enough to carry across the crowded, buzzing foyer so all her relatives could hear her authority in action. "Eleanor, stop whatever you're doing down in the basement or up in your little corner. Bring the fresh tea and pastry tray out to the living room right now. Our elders have arrived and they shouldn't have to wait for service." The sudden, chaotic chatter in the foyer didn't stop immediately, but a strange, heavy static seemed to creep into the air. Dozens of heads turned toward the base of the staircase, expecting an elderly, tired mother-in-law to scurry out of the back hallway wearing a flour-dusted apron, carrying a tray of refreshments. Instead, the second-floor landing remained completely silent for 3 beats. Then, my footsteps sounded on the hardwood steps, slow, measured, and deliberate. Click, click, click. Every eye in the room snapped upward. The chatter died down instantly, replaced by a sudden, suffocating quiet. I didn't come down wearing a kitchen apron or house slippers. I walked down the steps wearing a sharp, impeccably tailored, charcoal gray wool pantsuit, my hair styled with absolute precision, and a look of unyielding coldness in my eyes. In my left hand, I wasn't carrying a tray of tea and pastries. I was holding the heavy black leather briefcase secured by its digital combination lock, alongside a thick, stapled dossier of legal instruments, bank statements, and court-stamped eviction filings. I reached the bottom of the staircase, standing tall and square in the center of the foyer. The silence in the room became so absolute that you could hear the distant ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Brittany's smile froze halfway across her face, her mouth opening slightly as her eyes darted from my tailored suit to the heavy legal files in my hand. Arthur froze near the front door, the color draining completely from his cheeks, as if he had just seen a ghost walk out of a tomb. For a long moment, nobody moved, nobody breathed, and nobody dared to speak. The grand holiday fantasy they'd spent weeks constructing around my life and property had just run headfirst into an immovable brick wall of reality. I looked past Brittany's stunned expression, scanned the sea of 40 confused, staring relatives, and let a single razor-sharp sentence drop into the dead silence.
"Welcome to Thanksgiving, everyone. Please make sure you read the eviction notices before you pick your bedrooms." The words hit the room with the force of shattering glass, breaking the spell, and sending a sudden wave of panic rippling through the crowd as the illusion instantly collapsed into ruin.
The heavy silence that followed my opening words didn't last long before the shockwave rippled through the crowded foyer. 40 pairs of eyes stared at me, shifting wildly between disbelief and utter confusion, waiting for someone to laugh and break the tension. Nobody laughed. I didn't give them time to recover their footing. Stepping further forward into the center of the hall, letting the afternoon light catch the crisp lines of my tailored suit, I raised my voice so that every single person within earshot could hear each measured word. Welcome, everyone, to what will be your very brief stay in my home. The lease is terminated, the deed belongs to the Ojai Heritage Land Trust, and you have exactly 60 minutes to clear out before the authorities arrive. The room erupted instantly. Gasps, squeaks of disbelief, and angry murmurs bounced off the high ceilings. Brittany's face drained of every drop of color, her eyes wide with mounting panic as her extended family turned to her, demanding answers she didn't have. "What is she talking about, Brittany?" her mother yelled over the noise, stepping forward. "What kind of sick joke is this? Did you not tell us we were staying here for the whole weekend?" Brittany didn't answer her mother. Instead, her hands trembled violently as she yanked her designer smartphone out of her pocket, desperate to squash the unfolding nightmare. She dialed the premium catering service she had hired weeks ago, frantically hoping to distract everyone with food while she figured out the mess. She pressed the phone to her ear, waiting for someone to pick up. A sharp, automated electronic tone cut her off. The call failed instantly. She tapped the screen again, redialing with shaking fingers, only to receive the exact same robotic rejection message. Her jaw went slack as she opened her banking application to check the corporate account funds, but the screen flashed a cold, terrifying warning. Account frozen permanently due to verified fraudulent activity and unauthorized credit misuse. Before Brittany could even draw enough breath to scream, a heavy thud echoed from the front driveway, followed by the metallic clatter of heavy equipment. Heads snapped toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the front lawn. A large flatbed tow truck had just pulled up directly behind Arthur's $85,000 luxury SUV, blocking the driveway completely. A burly driver in a high-visibility vest stepped out of the cab, pulled out a digital tablet, and walked straight toward Arthur's vehicle. Arthur bolted toward the front door, throwing it open and stumbling out onto the porch like a man possessed, waving his arms wildly at the driver. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" Arthur roared, his voice cracking with panic as he pointed down at the vehicle. "Get away from my car right now. You have no right to touch that." The tow truck driver didn't even flinch. He looked up at Arthur with a flat, indifferent expression, holding his tablet out toward the doorway. "Repo order. Monthly financing defaulted. Secondary backing account permanently locked by financial institution. And direct asset seizure authorized 40 minutes ago. Step aside, sir, or I'll have the local police handle the obstruction." Arthur froze in his tracks, the blood completely draining from his face. He looked back at his gleaming SUV, the very symbol of the lifestyle he had bragged about, as heavy steel winches hooked onto the front axle, lifting the wheels off the ground. Inside the foyer, the illusion had completely shattered into dust. 40 relatives stood shoulder to shoulder in complete shock, realizing they had driven hundreds of miles for a non-existent holiday banquet hosted by two fraudsters who were about to be tossed out onto the street.
I didn't raise my voice, I didn't gloat, and I offered not a single word of comfort. I simply turned away from the chaos, sliding the heavy leather briefcase back on my arm. With slow, unhurried steps, I walked straight past the frozen crowd of staring relatives, stepped past Arthur, who was standing paralyzed on the porch, and walked down the gravel pathway toward the front gate. A sleek, quiet silver sedan was waiting by the curb, its engine idling softly. The driver had already popped the trunk. I opened the back door, slid smoothly into the back seat, and closed the door behind me without ever looking back at the house that had once been my burden. As the car pulled away from the curb and merged into autumn traffic, leaving the panic and wreckage far behind, a profound, weightless peace settled over my chest. The courtroom battle was over, and my new life had finally begun.
The 40 relatives didn't stay to watch the final collapse. The moment the registry office clerk confirmed that the title deeds belonged exclusively to me and Arthur and Clara's names were nowhere to be found, a collective wave of disgust swept through the room. Whispers of deceit hissed from corner to corner. Without a single word of farewell, all 40 of them turned on their heels and marched out, their faces twisted in bitter disappointment and blind rage. They hadn't come for family, they had come for a slice of a pie that never existed. Within minutes, the sprawling foyer was empty, save for 2 shivering figures and a towering mountain of cheap luggage. Arthur and Clara stood stranded on the pavement under the harsh afternoon sun, surrounded by designer suitcases stuffed with illusion and debt up to their eyeballs. No more lavish hotels, no more borrowed luxury. For the first time in their lives, reality dragged them down by the ankles, forcing them to face the unforgiving pavement and the crushing weight of their own 2 feet. Arthur grabbed my arm with a desperate, trembling grip, his voice cracking beneath the facade of false pride. "Mother, you can't just throw us out like stray dogs. We are your flesh and blood." I didn't flinch. I looked straight into his hollow eyes, letting the silence stretch until it suffocated every remaining ounce of his entitlement. "Blood builds a home, Arthur. You only learned how to auction it." I pulled my arm away, leaving him standing there in the dust of his own making. Now, thousands of feet above the ground, the noise of that life is nothing more than a distant hum. I sit by the window of the cabin, the aircraft gliding smoothly toward the timeless art and quiet warmth of Italy. Outside, the sky is an ocean of endless, blinding white clouds. I swirl the deep red wine in my glass, watching the light catch the rim. A profound, weightless relief settles deep into my chest. It isn't the hollow thrill of revenge that warms me. It is the exquisite peace of finally unlatching a heavy iron gate I had kept locked against my own sanity for decades. I have finally set myself free from the toxic prison of enabling. Looking back, I realize the hardest lesson a parent must ever learn is where love ends and survival begins. A parent's love is supposed to be an ocean, vast and unconditional, but an ocean was never meant to be a dumping ground for laziness, entitlement, and bottomless greed. For years, I confused rescue with affection, mistaking my own endurance for virtue, while only feeding the monster that sought to consume us both. Setting firm, unyielding boundaries is not an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate form of self-respect. It is drawing a line in the dirt and declaring that dignity has no price tag. True grace isn't found in how much you are willing to endure for someone else's comfort,
but in having the courage to walk away, letting them fall so hard that they finally learn how to stand.
Before we say goodbye, I want to talk to you for just a moment. Wherever you are right now, what city are you sitting in, and what time is it on your clock as you watch this? Let me know in the comments below so I can see just how far this story traveled to reach you. More importantly, looking at this story, what is the biggest lesson you are taking away today? Is it about the strength to stand back up when everything is stripped away, the courage to walk away from toxic bonds, or the realization that human dignity and self-respect can never be bought with a price tag? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and I would love to know how this resonated with you. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss our next story. Thank you so much for watching. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next video.